Welcome to Romance of the First Night where every heartbeat tells a story. Here, words aren't just spoken, they're felt. Step into moments where silence speaks louder than promises, where two souls meet after a lifetime of searching, where love trembles between fear and faith, and where what's left behind glows forever in the heart. Each story you'll hear is not just fiction, it's emotion in its purest form. Unspoken connections, timeless nights, tender courage, and the eternal afterglow that never fades. If you've ever believed that real love still exists, that it can be quiet, raw, and endlessly human, you're in the right place. This is not just a channel, it's a feeling. Welcome to the stories that stay. When eyes first met, there was no need for an introduction. Something beyond language stirred a quiet recognition that felt older than memory itself. It was not the kind of encounter that announces itself with grand gestures or loud laughter. It was silent, calm, almost sacred. There was no rush to speak, because somehow everything that needed to be said had already been exchanged in that stillness between two breaths. There are moments when the world slows down, not because time changes, but because something inside learns to listen. That's what it felt like that evening, the soft murmur of the air, the rhythm of footsteps on stone, and the way the heart begins to echo something it doesn't yet understand. The eyes that met carried warmth, a quiet intensity, and an unspoken promise. That was the beginning of everything. Words came later, but they never carried as much weight as the silences. The pauses between conversations became the real language, a shared understanding that neither could have explained to anyone else. Sometimes it was a look across a crowded room, sometimes a gentle touch on the hand, sometimes the stillness that followed laughter. In every pause, there was meaning. In every unspoken word, there was trust. There was a night when rain began without warning. The world outside blurred into silver, and in that small space of warmth and quiet, there was no need to speak. The rain became music, and breathing became rhythm. Fingers brushed, eyes lingered, and in that tender closeness, everything was said without a single sound. It wasn't about possession or desire, it was about belonging, the feeling of being seen completely, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Love that deep doesn't shout, it hums softly. It finds its voice in the smallest gestures, in the way a blank is pulled closer, in the way a laugh breaks the quiet, in the way two people begin to breathe and sink without even noticing. It's the love that doesn't need constant reassurance because it lives in the simple certainty of being known. There were days of distance too, when life pulled in different directions. Yet even then, silence carried the connection. A message left unanswered still spoke of care. A memory shared through a glance still whispered understanding. That's what makes a bond unbreakable, when even absence feels like presence, when even silence feels like a conversation. The world around didn't always understand it. People often think love must be loud to be real, full of grand gestures, declarations, and promises. But this kind of love lives in quiet corners. It breathes in the calm spaces that no one else sees. It doesn't perform, it simply exists. There was an evening when the sky burned gold, and the air was thick with the scent of summer. Sitting together, watching the horizon melt into dusk, there was no need to talk about the future. The moment was enough. The heart doesn't always need plans when it feels safe. In that shared silence, the world felt both infinite and small, held together by two quiet heartbeats. Over time, something remarkable happened. Words began to feel unnecessary, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, too deep, too sacred, too real for language. Love, when it grows this way, becomes like breathing. It doesn't demand attention. It simply continues, steady and certain, no matter the noise of the world. There were moments of doubt too. Love isn't perfect, even when it feels meant to be. There were times when fear crept in, when the mind whispered questions the heart didn't want to answer. But then a look, a quiet nod, a familiar touch, and everything settled again. That's the beauty of unspoken understanding. It doesn't need explanations. It forgives without asking why. One evening, when shadows stretched long across the walls, there was a silence that felt heavier than usual. Something was changing, though neither wanted to name it. The world outside was moving too fast, and hearts can't always keep up. Yet even in that heaviness, love remained steady, patient, waiting in the quiet. Sometimes love means holding on, and sometimes it means letting the silence do the speaking. What stayed after all those moments wasn't the words said, but the way they were felt. The memory of warmth, of shared laughter, of tears that didn't need explanation. That's what endured. Even when distance grew, even when time did its quiet work of separation, the connection remained untouched, because real love, once understood, never truly disappears. It becomes part of the soul's language. Years later, hearing a familiar song, seeing the same kind of rain, or catching the scent of summer air can bring it all back, not with pain, but with peace, because that kind of love doesn't fade, it transforms. It teaches how to listen without hearing, how to see without looking, how to feel without touching. It's strange, isn't it? The world measures love by words, by promises, by declarations, by stories written in ink. But the greatest love stories are written in silence. They live between heartbeats, in glances that say everything, in the quiet certainty that no matter how far life carries two people, the connection remains invisible but unbroken. That is what the unspoken connection truly is, a love that breathes without sound, that speaks without words, that survives without reason. It's the kind of love that makes the heart quieter, softer, wiser. And when it finally ends, it doesn't leave emptiness behind. It leaves understanding. Because once love has been shared in silence, it never really goes away. It becomes part of the air itself, always present, always known, always waiting in the quiet spaces where words would only get in the way. And sometimes when the night is still and the world is asleep, the silence whispers again, reminding that true love doesn't need to be spoken to be real. It began in a way that didn't feel like a beginning at all, but like remembering something that had been waiting for years to be remembered. There was no spark, no lightning, no rush, only a quiet knowing that something inside had shifted, the kind of recognition that doesn't come from sight or sound, but from a place deeper than memory, as if two lost pieces had finally found their way back to each other. That night, the air carried a stillness that made every sound feel sacred. The sky hung low, brushed with silver clouds, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Nothing felt ordinary. Even the passing wind felt like it knew something miraculous was unfolding. When eyes met, the world softened. Time loosened its grip, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly as it was meant to be. There was no pretending, no need to hide behind charm or words. The usual dance of introductions faded away. Instead, there was that quiet pull, magnetic, certain, and terrifying in its truth. Every heartbeat echoed the same silent thought, so it's you. The first night wasn't about newness, it was about recognition. The soul doesn't rush when it meets what it has been waiting for. Every moment felt like rediscovery, a laugh that sounded familiar, a touch that carried history, a voice that felt like home even before it spoke a single word. The heart recognized what the mind could not explain. It's strange how the body reacts to truth before the mind accepts it. Every sense became heightened, the warmth in the air, the rhythm of breathing, the weight of silence between words. It wasn't attraction, it was belonging, the feeling that every step taken before had been leading here, to this exact night, to this exact connection. There was no fear, only surrender. Not the kind of surrender that gives away strength, but the kind that happens when something inside finally rests. The kind of surrender that feels like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. It was destiny, but not in the dramatic way stories often tell it, more like the soft click of a lock finding its key after years of searching. Even the simplest gestures felt eternal. A glance across the room carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. A hand reaching out felt like fate itself stretching through time. Every breath, every pause, carried a depth that words could never hold. And though the night was young, it already felt infinite. There was a moment when everything grew quiet, not around, but within. The noise of thought disappeared. There was no past to grieve, no future to worry about, only presence, only two souls recognizing each other in the purest form of silence. It was as if the universe stepped aside for just a second, allowing love to speak in its original language. Nothing about it felt planned, yet everything felt written. Every choice, every mistake, every heartbreak before had led here. To this night where time folded in on itself, where all that had been lost was found again, where love was not new, but ancient reborn in familiar faces. The room felt smaller, warmer, softer. The air carried an invisible glow, the kind that only comes when two souls finally stop searching. Eyes met again, and it felt like the whole world tilted toward that moment. No words, no explanations, just the quiet awe of finally understanding why nothing before had ever truly fit. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about fantasy. It was about truth. The kind that strips away everything unnecessary, leaving only what's real, the heart's quiet, trembling yes. That was the language spoken that night, not with voices, but with presence. There are kinds of love that feel like fire, bright, wild, consuming. But this one felt like light, steady, eternal, gentle enough to see through the darkness. It didn't demand or conquer. It simply existed, radiant and certain. That's how the first night felt, like being seen without effort, loved without condition, understood without question. Hours passed unnoticed. The moon rose high and began to fall, but time stayed suspended in that stillness. Every heartbeat felt like a universe expanding and folding again. Every breath was a prayer of gratitude for something finally whole. When dawn began to approach, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a quiet promise. There was no need for declarations, no need for forever. The soul already knew. The connection was beyond the reach of time, untouched by distance, unshaken by circumstance. The night had done its work. Two souls had found each other, and that was enough. Later, when life began to pull and bend as it always does, that night remained like a light inside the heart. The memory of it wasn't tied to place or time, but to a feeling, the peace that comes from being truly seen. That memory became an anchor. Whenever the world grew heavy, remembering that night was enough to remind that love, when it's real, doesn't fade. It changes shape, but never disappears. Years could pass, faces could blur, voices could fade, but the soul remembers. The first night lives on like a pulse beneath the surface of everything else, a quiet hum, reminding that destiny isn't something we chase. It's something that finds us when we're finally still enough to listen. Even now, when the air grows quiet and the night stretches deep, that same stillness returns. It carries the same peace, the same warmth, the same gentle certainty that love, when it's true, doesn't need to be searched, for it recognizes itself. And perhaps that's what destiny really is. Not an event, not a plan, but a moment of recognition between two souls that were always meant to find each other. That night was never about beginnings. It was about remembrance. The night when two souls, after wandering through lifetimes of searching, finally came home. And even now, in the silence between heartbeats, that home still exists, untouched, eternal, alive. There are moments when love feels too fragile to touch, like holding a flame in cupped hands, afraid that even a breath might extinguish it. That night carried that kind of quiet trembling. Everything was still, but beneath the stillness lived a storm of feeling that had no words. The world outside was calm, yet inside, every heartbeat echoed louder than it should have. It wasn't fear of the person before me. It was fear of what love like this could do. There was tenderness in the air, the kind that asks for trust, the kind that could break something if held too tightly. Love had always been an idea before, something admired from a distance, something dreamed about in the safety of solitude. But now it had a face, a voice, a heartbeat that matched my own, and that made it real. Too real, that's where the trembling began, not from doubt, but from the ache of knowing that something this pure could disappear as quickly as it arrived. There was light falling softly through the window, brushing over the space between us. No words were needed, even the smallest glance felt like a confession. It was a fragile kind of silence, not empty, but full of everything we didn't dare to say. Every emotion had its opposite living beside it, desire wrapped in hesitation, courage shadowed by fear. The heart wanted to leap forward, but the mind whispered caution. Trust isn't something that can be demanded. It's something built slowly, like the rising of dawn. That night felt like standing on the edge of something infinite, too beautiful to step into, too powerful to resist. The closeness was both comfort and ache. There was warmth, yet the air carried a strange fragility, like one wrong word could shatter it. The heart knew what it wanted, but it also knew what it stood to lose. That's the cruel beauty of love. It opens everything at once. Joy, fear, hope, and the terrifying awareness that nothing is guaranteed. Every small gesture carried weight. A touch on the hand wasn't simple, it was a question. A look wasn't fleeting, it was an answer. The space between breaths became a place where everything lived: the longing, the doubt, the quiet plea not to be hurt. And yet, in that delicate space, something sacred was born: trust. Not spoken, not promised, just silently offered. There was a moment when time felt suspended. The sound of breathing, the soft hum of the night, the beating of two hearts in unsteady rhythm, everything slowed. And it felt like the world was holding its breath with us. There was no plan, no certainty of what would follow. Only the fragile truth of the moment, two souls standing before each other with nothing to hide and everything to lose. Love, at its core, is risk. To open the heart is to accept the possibility of breaking. But that night taught something different, that there is also courage in vulnerability. The trembling wasn't weakness, it was honesty. The fear of loss meant the love was real. Only what matters deeply can be lost. There were words unspoken, resting just behind the lips, not out of secrecy, but reverence. Some feelings are too sacred for language. The eyes said everything instead. I trust you, even though I'm afraid. I want this, even though it could hurt. I'm here, even though I don't know where this will lead. The night stretched on softly, and the fear didn't leave. It simply changed shape. It became part of the tenderness, like a reminder that love isn't meant to be controlled, only cherished. Every heartbeat felt like a fragile thread tying two worlds together. Every breath was a silent vow to handle the moment with care. There was no need for grand promises, no talk of forever. Forever felt too heavy, too far away. What mattered was the now, this heartbeat, this trust, this trembling beauty of being known and not running away. When dawn began to glow faintly at the edge of the sky, the fear returned in a quieter form. Morning has a way of testing the magic of the night. Would it still be there when the light came? Would the tenderness survive the ordinary rhythm of day? Those questions lingered unspoken, heavy but gentle, resting in the quiet between us. But there was a look, soft, steady, that answered before words could. Love doesn't vanish with sunlight. It simply changes its color. It grows quieter, surer. The trembling doesn't end. It simply becomes part of the rhythm. That's what love really is: the courage to keep choosing it, even when fear whispers that it could fade. Every love story carries this tender fear, the awareness that what is most precious is also most fragile. But that's what gives it beauty. Without the risk of loss, love would have no meaning. It's the trembling that makes it real, the hesitation that makes it human. Looking back, that night wasn't about perfection or passion. It was about trust, the moment two hearts decided to stay, even in the presence of fear. It was about letting love in, knowing it could change everything, and it did. It softened the edges of the soul, teaching that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength in its purest form. Even now, when memories return the soft glow of that night, the sound of the world holding still, there's still that same flutter inside. The tender fear never really leaves. It becomes a quiet companion, reminding that love, when it's true, will always carry both trembling and peace. Because the heart only trembles for what it knows is real. And real love, the kind that shakes and steadies in the same breath, is worth every fear it brings. There are moments that never leave, even when everything else does. They settle deep inside, glowing softly beneath the years, not as memory, but as presence. That night became one of those moments. It was never loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, almost shy, yet it changed everything. The world outside had gone still, as if time itself was listening. There was warmth in the air, not from light or fire, but from closeness, from the peace that comes when hearts find a rhythm that feels familiar. It was the kind of night that doesn't announce its importance until much later, when its echo still hums through the soul. The way the heart felt then is impossible to describe without simplifying it. It wasn't just love, it was understanding, belonging, and a strange kind of silence that made even breathing feel meaningful. Every gesture, every glance, carried the weight of something eternal, something that could never be undone. When dawn came, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of memory, the first light that would forever fall softly over that night in recollection. The world woke, but the heart didn't move. It stayed there, still listening to the afterglow of what had been shared. There's a kind of peace that comes after real connection, the quiet certainty that something sacred has happened. Something that doesn't need to be repeated to be real. That's what remained. Days passed, then months, and life unfolded in its ordinary way, but the night lived on quietly within. Every now and then, something small would bring it back, a familiar scent, a song playing faintly in the distance, the color of the evening sky. Each time it wasn't memory that returned, but feeling, the same warmth, the same stillness, the same whisper that love, once truly shared, never fades. It's strange how the heart remembers without permission. How it carries the softness of a touch, the rhythm of laughter, the comfort of a silence that needed no explanation. Those things don't belong to the past. They exist beyond it. They become part of who you are. Life moved forward as it always does. There were new places, new faces, new stories. Yet beneath them all, that night continued to glow. It wasn't a haunting. It was a blessing, a quiet reminder that something beautiful had once been real. The kind of beauty that doesn't demand to be relived, only remembered. There were moments when the ache of distance felt sharp, when the absence became almost physical. But even then, the love didn't leave. It changed shape. It became a kind of strength, a calm faith that connection doesn't end with time or space. It lingers in the smallest corners of life, in every kind word, in every act of gentleness, in every breath taken with gratitude. Sometimes the world teaches that love must be possessed to be kept, that if someone leaves, love leaves too. But that night taught something different. True love doesn't ask to be owned. It asks to be honored. It doesn't vanish when life changes. It becomes quieter, deeper, woven into the unseen fabric of being. There were nights when the stars were bright and the air still, and that same warmth would return not as longing, but as peace. The soul doesn't mourn what was real. It carries it. That's what makes the afterglow eternal. It's not the person that remains, but what they awakened inside. Years later, when the world felt heavier and the heart more tired, the memory of that night became a small light that refused to go out. In moments of doubt, it reminded that love, at its truest, never disappears. It transforms into wisdom, into kindness, into quiet courage. Even when faces fade and voices blur, the feeling stays. It becomes the invisible thread that connects the person you were to the person you've become. That thread is what keeps the heart soft, even after loss. It whispers that love was not wasted, that it was never meant to stay confined to one night or one person. It was meant to live on in everything touched by it. The afterglow is not about holding on. It's about letting love continue its journey through time, through memory, through the quiet places where it can still do its work. Because love like that never really leaves, it becomes part of the air, part of every heartbeat that still believes in goodness. Sometimes, standing by a window at dusk, the same calm feeling returns, the same silence that spoke louder than words. It's then the realization comes, the night never truly ended. It continues to live in the heart, glowing softly beneath the noise of life. That glow is not sadness, it's gratitude. Gratitude for having felt something so true, even once. The afterglow of real love doesn't fade because it doesn't belong to time. It belongs to the soul. It becomes a quiet promise that what is genuine can never be lost, not by distance, not by silence, not even by the years. It lives in the way the heart still opens, still hopes, still believes. And so, even now, when life feels different and the world has changed, that night still breathes somewhere inside. It hums like a secret melody that only the heart can hear, gentle, steady, eternal. Because once love has truly been shared, it doesn't end. It becomes light, and that light never goes out. If tonight's story touched something deep inside your heart, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe, not just to stay connected, but to keep love itself alive through every tale we tell. Join this journey of hearts that speak without words, souls that recognize each other, fears that make love stronger, and memories that never fade. Until the next story, keep believing, because real love never truly says goodbye. It only changes form and waits for you in the next afterglow.